Welcome to Wine Country at Work. I'm Ralph DeAmicis, your host. This is where we talk about the world of wine tourism and about the world of winemaking that makes it possible. I saw a couple of interesting articles this past week. One was about the effect of alcohol on the microbiome of the body. And you know, I've talked before about wine being the original health drink, and I thought this was an interesting article because they found that people who drank a lot damaged their microbiome. In other words, they damaged the flora in the body. And this is important. You know, one of the things that gives wine its distinctive flavor actually has to do with the microflora in the soil. And that same way that the soil has a microflora, our body has microflora in the bowels, and it protects the lining of the bowel, which is very, very thin, but it helps digest the foods before it goes through that very thin wall, and it stops any kind of toxins from making its way into the bloodstream. So a lot of times allergies, for instance, are caused by undigested proteins and particles making it into the bloodstream because this surface has been damaged. And people who drank a lot damaged this. And it's not surprising. Alcohol is a solvent, and you expose the body to a lot of solvent and breaks things down. But what was really interesting about this was that they found that people who drank wine in moderation actually had a more diverse flora in their bowel. And if you think of the flora in the bowel as your garden, there's about 400 different kinds of flora, as I recall, right? And some are very life-affirming and promote your good health, and some are kind of life-defeating. So what you usually hear about is the things that promote yeast, for instance, candida. They tend to produce a lot of acid, and if they get an overgrowth of that, it can cause a lot of problems in the body. But there's other flora that's very good for you, the acidophilus, the bifidophytus, things like that. These are well-known floras that are very productive for the body. So a good diet tends to promote the good flora, and it tends to inhibit the bad flora. But they all tend to exist there, just like in your garden. There's always going to be some plants you don't want, which we call weeds. I mean, basically a weed is any plant that is in your garden that you don't want. And then there's plants that you do want. So you want to promote the ones you want and, inhibit the ones you don't. What's interesting, like I said, is that people who drank wine in moderation tended to have a more diverse population. And generally speaking, this diversity is considered good. And they said, well, maybe it's not the alcohol that's doing this. Maybe it's the proanthocyanidins, and those are those flavor. That's the things that gives wine its color to a certain extent. But proanthocyanidins are antioxidants, and they're pretty highly prized. Though the ones that our own body produces are actually more powerful, but the plant ones can be helpful. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes into the fact that when you are drinking a wine, when it's in the bottle, it's still alive. Remember, this is a fermented product. It means there's a microbial thing going on. There's yeast active. This is a living product. And when you drink it, you're taking this living substance into your body, and it's active at the microbial level. And I think that's one of the things that's really promoting it. Any winemaker knows that you have to be really careful to make sure that your fermentation is finished before you put it in the bottles. Because if you don't, it's going to blow the caps out. It's going to blow the corks out, right? This is one of the reasons why they fill tanks up. When they put the juice in, they put the grapes in, they only fill it up halfway because in the process of fermentation, it's going to grow and, let the gases out, and it's going to bubble and go up. And if you go up too high, you're going to end up with wine out there on the floor. This is a living substance. Years ago when wine was made in amphora, which is the way the Romans and the Greeks made it, when they would open up those first amphora in the springtime for the first springtime festival, I'm sure they were still bubbling a bit, but they were not necessarily a bad thing. Why do we like sparkling wines? We like them because of the bubbles. So this is, I think, the real reason why I think wine in moderation is actually quite good for the intestinal flora, because you're taking the energy that came from the microflora of the soil, and it's being incorporated into the the microbial body of the wine, and you're making that part of your digestive process, very much in the way that we eat pickles and yogurts and such to help the flora of the bowel. So I thought that was a really interesting article. Another one I thought that was very cool was someone said, the importance in tasting room on wine sales of developing a rapport with your guests. Well, anyone in sales knows that, I'm Italian-American, very much Italian-American. And if I meet anyone who has an Italian last name or something close to it, I will ask them where they're from, where's their family from. Sometimes they're not Italian, but that's okay because it starts the conversation going. I'm always looking for that common ground between myself and another person. That's a basic part of being in sales. Where are we alike? Because if I can understand where they're coming from, I can understand what they need. And then I know whether or not what I have to offer them, whether it's books or years ago as an herbalist or as years ago when I made many different things. I made jewelry, I made leather goods. Do I have something that can benefit them? And that's one of the ways you find that. Where's our common ground? And one of the ways in which tasting rooms are famous, especially the great tasting room, the superstars are famous, is their storytelling. The stories of wine country are remarkable. And I realized that I should share this with you. One of our books, we have actually a series of books. It's called the Wine Country in Shorts, and it's stories. And the big book is called Wine Country in Shorts, The Stories of Napa and Sonoma. And then when I went out to start marketing them locally, I remembered something from many years ago when I first started selling tour books back like 17 years ago, that trying to sell a tour book in either county that's mentioned the other county, like in other words, Sonoma, if I try to sell a book that said the wine country of Napa and Sonoma, they wouldn't sell it. In Napa, they wouldn't sell it if it said Sonoma on the cover, any place. They didn't want to see a magazine from the other county. We are very location-based here. So I had to split the tour books into separate books. And so the great majority I sell at stores and markets are either for Sonoma or for Napa. I do sell certain ones that are combos, or dream tours are like that, dream tours of Napa and Sonoma, but I only get to sell those online. It's something I learned years ago. So when I came out with the storybook and I was trying to sell it locally, I ran into a wall at all the local markets. So I split it into two separate books. So one is our favorite Sonoma stories. The other one's our favorite Napa stories. And in both of those versions, I use the same introduction. And it's called, I'm going to read that to you. I hope you find it interesting, because I think it describes a lot about what I'm talking about. A Land of Stories. This book celebrates the unique storytelling style that goes well with wine. Colorful, relaxed, thoughtful, a little rambling, and segmented. That's because the pace of the story allows time for the listeners to taste the wine and enjoy the illumination it bestows. That's how the ancients described the experience of drinking alcohol, being illuminated by the wine. We hope that you enjoy these stories that are only as remarkable as the wonderful places and people they describe, and that are treasured by so many. A wine region's personality is not just about the topography and climate, but also about the people living there and how they adapted to its unique qualities. Those experiences are shared in stories. Now, where did we get these stories? We heard them while standing in the back of countless tasting rooms. For many years, there were a couple of hundred wineries where customers could just walk in, stand at the bar, and taste the wines. At other wineries, the tastings happen sitting down, and of course, there are cave and vineyard tours. In these tasting experiences, the host shared information about the wines and many shared stories. In any given year, we visited over 300 tasting rooms, and we heard so many stories and multiple versions of those stories. The overall feeling was very casual, relaxed, and friendly. And we retold these stories countless times to groups and wine tour clients while driving around the North Bay wine country. See, it was easy to recall these tales when we visited the places where the events occurred. So to pull together the stories for this book, Ralph, aka me, started dictating them into my phone while our clients were tasting at the wineries. We wanted to write them down, these stories, for a while, but it was hard to find the time. And then a fortuitous thing happened. The local wine tasting fees escalated, and the wineries recognized that if they abandoned their quick tasting bars in favor of longer seated experiences, their sales would improve. Honestly, any tour guide could have told them that. You see, the big wines grown in the North Bay really benefit when they have more time to open up in the glass. However, as the tastings became more formal and exclusive and expensive, it was a rare time when we got to stay with our clients during the sessions. That scheduling time finally gave me a predictable amount of precious, uninterrupted time to dictate the stories, and then later improve the drafts on my computer. Choosing the stories was hard because an amazing number pop out of my mouth as I drive around with clients. Sometimes I remember a story because we're passing the winery where a friend shared it with me. Many stories have been around so long that there are multiple published versions. For instance, 4 different people from 3 different groups are credited with naming Mount St. Helena, the beautiful volcanic cone that towers over the northern valleys. But if you keep an open mind, dig deep enough into the research, and account for human nature, you can weave the various versions together into an enjoyable, credible narrative that's pretty close to the truth. For us, this reweaving happened spontaneously through telling the stories numerous times while noticing both our listeners' responses and whether or not it felt true as we spoke the words. So that's a concept from the healing arts, because hearing lies makes us weaker, but hearing the truth makes us stronger. On the road, we've shared these tales with clients in 15 to 20-minute snippets, which is the ideal driving time between wineries, because it allows enough time to metabolize some of the alcohol in preparation for another tasting. But here, we've combined those pieces into complete stories, and many turned out to be much longer than we expected. Even though the stories give us the narrative, in the full version of Wine Country in Shorts, and in our book, the Tour Guide series, we describe the traditions and practices in the winemaking world. These seem to be endlessly interesting to our clients, but that's not surprising. 200 years ago, most people worked on the land. Today, a tiny fraction of Americans grow everyone else's food and wine. So for most people, this life on the land is far removed from their personal universe. But there must be some deep region within us that still yearns for that ancestral connection to nature. Is it due to our ancestry, our genetics, or simply our sensual enjoyment of wine that so many people are drawn to visit the places where it's made? We think the answer to that is yes, to all of the above. Winemaking is a very elegant type of agriculture that has delightful results. Visiting this region is an adventure, although not as risky as it was in the early 1800s, when visitors had to contend with the numerous California grizzly bears that lived here. There were so many that outside the region, the word Napa meant bear, and the mountains that separated the 2 counties was a favorite home for them. We think that's why bravery and audacity are so prized locally, and why the region attracts so many of the big personalities who show up in these stories from the past and present. We're sure a scientific study would show that wine tastes better when accompanied by a story, and any story becomes more enjoyable when the wine is good. Now, any experienced winery host knows that's true, which is why as they fill the glasses, the host shares stories about the winery's history and location. There's only so much you can say about what's in the glass, because to our bodies, flavor is a language, and great wines have no problem speaking for themselves. When they tell the story of the struggles involved in clearing the land, planting the vines, building the winery, and making a good wine, that connects the guest to the bottle in an emotionally memorable way. Later, when the guest opens the bottle at home, that memory makes the wine taste better. And they have the added pleasure of telling that story to their friends and family. So, we feel that the best way to enjoy these stories is with a glass of wine in your hand. If you're listening to this as an audiobook while driving in a car, we'll give you a pass on that. So that was a little segment from our favorite Sonoma stories. You can probably read more about that at winecountryatwork.com, of course. And I hope it gives you some perspective about the importance of storytelling here in wine country. It is really a wonderful art. We've heard so many great stories over the years from some great hosts. So come back after the break here at Wine Country at Work and listen in to one of our wonderful interviews with our local colleagues.